here, Brad. Welcome and thank you for joining us, that you can be here. We've had a long journey together, Brad. You have presented some time ago as well with a different hat on. Here you are. And specifically, I asked you to participate today for us because I know that you have a propensity to think alternative and to think about how to do business differently. In your previous businesses, you did the same thing. And yeah, I was quite excited to see that you've got a whole new thing going with Aynjil. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you unpack for us sort of a little bit. You know, we always think about, you know, that old saying that says, don't try and reinvent the wheel. But I think sometimes we have to reinvent the wheel because sometimes that wheel is not what we need anymore. And maybe you're going to help us on that journey. But thank you very much, Brad.
Thanks for the intro, Tony. Morning, everybody. It's really wonderful to be here. As many times as I've done this, it still feels slightly awkward presenting online when you can't see the people in front of you and engage. But this morning, I suppose I've taken a slightly different tack in that what I'd like to land this morning is a few discussion points that lead us into the panel later, rather than kind of view this as a standalone presentation. The title is Breaking Down the Barriers of Innovation, and I'm going to really look to cover these three areas. The first one is an argument that, for me, the only sustainable way to build innovation into your business and to build it into the industry at large is what we call purpose-led innovation. The second point is that actually, in a beautiful way, and the speakers before me spent much of the time really explaining why this is true, is that I think nowadays there really are very few barriers to innovation. If you think about the incredible opportunity we have today to do wonderfully new and different things and the tools we have available to us, it's an incredible privilege and opportunity. The final point, though, and for me, this is really where the rubber hits the road, is that innovating in some ways is the easy part, but actually getting market adoption and profitable distribution is where the rubber hits the road. And unless we're able to solve this problem, most great ideas are simply going to die. Innovations are useful in and of themselves, but unless we can actually make them stick, unless we can convince customers that they're necessary, unless we can actually drive broad-based market adoption, we're not going to turn these ideas into profitable commercial enterprises. So purpose is the yearning to do what we do in the service of something larger than ourselves. It's the idea of being part of something more than just you. And people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And this is really what brings this idea of purpose-led innovation together. It's blending purpose and innovation. It's combining the brand, which speaks to more of the emotional, with the utility, the product, which speaks more to the functional. And it really brings a business perspective, but putting the customer first. For me, this idea of a strong purpose, it gives you a framework for all innovation going forward and a way to measure their success. And it enhances value to the customer. Simon Sinek talks about this idea of the infinite game, and he compares it to the finite game. Now, businesses who play the finite game are in a win-loss scenario. You're frantically working every month or every quarter to claw market share and beat your competitors. And there's a start and an end to that process. Whereas as businesses who are playing the infinite game wake up every morning and say, how do we make our product, our business, our systems better for the customer than they were yesterday? And again, just to pull on some of the thoughts that have been raised earlier this morning, this means that it's a journey. There's no start and end point. It's constant incremental improvement, and you're never actually finished. And it's my view that this is really, truly the only sustainable way to bring innovation across. Because what's the alternative to purpose-led innovation? The alternative is innovation for innovation's sake, or simply trying to outdo your competitors. And it's around putting really competitive pressures first, rather than putting the customer at the center of everything we do. I'm going to touch this morning on just bringing some examples from my career. So this is just to give some context to the businesses that I've been lucky enough to be involved in. I spent most of my career leading a business called FMI. It's a medium-sized specialist life insurer. We specialized primarily in income products, but the full suite of risk benefits, fully underwritten, reasonably complex products distributed almost entirely through independent financial advisors. Icon is probably best to describe him as a multi-product provider broker consultant. So a business that sits between insurers and the advisors. And then Tony mentioned it in the intro. Aynjil is a business that myself and a partner have founded. We launched it less than a year ago, and it's a digital life insurer specializing entirely in cancer insurance. For each of these three businesses, there was a strong golden thread throughout each. There was a purpose that drove every decision we made. At FMI, every single thing we did was saying, how can we improve our ability to protect your income? Icon is around democratizing great advice, making quality independent advice available to everybody, and leveling the playing fields in an industry where the bigger traditional incumbents have a disproportionate sway over decisions that are made. And Aynjil, our single goal is saying, how do we help more people beat cancer? So this is not to necessarily give you my background, but only to say that this is the context where I'll try and bring some examples throughout this morning's discussion to try and make it practical. So if we're talking about purpose-led innovation, how do you build this into the DNA of your company? And again, I think Tavio mentioned a few times that we don't know what's coming. We know it's going to be different. So it's very difficult to plan with a high degree of certainty what you're going to do next year and the year after. The only real defense against that is building this idea of innovation into the DNA of your business so that your business is able to respond to a changing world around us. There are a couple of ideas here. One is around being deliberate. Quality innovation doesn't just happen. It needs to be driven from the top of the business, and it needs to be a core part of the business's function. I guess linked to that is the question around, well, why innovate in the first place? Is innovation necessary? To Tony's point, why do we need to reinvent the wheel? And I would argue quite strongly that not innovating is the greatest risk in itself. The world is changing. Today's products and today's solutions are simply not necessarily the best solution. They're not optimal anymore. If we simply just look at the changing nature of our customers, people are living longer and working longer than ever before. The average age of someone being born, well, the average expected lifetime of someone being born today is 104. Only 6% of people in South Africa are going to be able to afford to retire at age 65. The age that you retire, the year you retire, is the most dangerous year of your life. You are 30% more likely to die the year you retire than the year before. And that is simply because as human beings, we have a deep, deep desire to have a purpose, to contribute, to be useful. And when you take that away, often it very simply takes away our will to live. Now, that's a deep philosophical question, but a practical question, a practical implication of that from an insurance point of view is that we simply know that our customers today are not going to retire at 65 and die at 90. Yet those two assumptions are still the basis of almost every financial planning tool and almost every life insurance product that's released. We have to adapt. The next point around building it into the DNA of your company is around consistently communicating, regularly and transparently. If you want to enable innovation from within your business, you need to create the environment where it could come from anywhere. And to equip people to think innovatively and to contribute to the direction of your business, it's important that they're informed. And it's important that you're regularly communicating successes and failures and communicating them in a way that is seen as progress. Passing the purpose on to others is absolutely crucial, that every single person in your business, from the most entry-level position through to the most senior, is just as motivated by your overall purpose as you are. Because that's the guiding light, that's the framework within all decisions, within which all great ideas need to be measured. And the next point is around getting buy-in. If you are trying to create an innovative business, it's important that you get buy-in from all stakeholders around you. It might sound funny, but one of the greatest things we did at FMI to enable innovation within the business is change the way we designed our board reports. We started measuring progress in the business according to key innovation drivers rather than simply sales volumes and market share. And once you get the buy-in from every single stakeholder to run your business by a different set of rules and a different set of metrics, it removes one of the greatest barriers to innovation. And finally, it's around obsessing over your customers, not your competition, which is an obvious statement, but anyone who's involved in a business who has got pressures to hit targets, to make profit, knows that it's not that easy to apply in practice. I look back on my career, there are a number of product developments we made, and without a doubt, the ones that I'm the most proud of are the ones where we put customers first. But there were many times, unfortunately, I'm embarrassed to admit, where we launched products simply to one up the competition. We launched products or drove product enhancements in response to competitive pressure. And almost without fail, those were decent, but not the greatest developments that we ever made. So what are the barriers to innovation? These are the most obvious ones. Leadership, culture, company structure. I would argue that probably the most important job of any leader in a business is to spend every single minute trying to create an environment where you're removing the barriers to innovation. We talk a lot about the stress and the pressure of protecting the status quo. How do you hit your sales targets? How do you grow at 5% every quarter? How do you maintain your market share? How do you protect your existing distribution channels? This protection of the status quo results in a fear of doing anything differently. And often it keeps us stuck at the start line, waiting for someone else to move first. The idea of a risk appetite versus risk tolerance. A risk appetite is easy, but can your business withstand taking risks? Can your business withstand the consequences if they don't work out? Because by its very nature, innovation is doing something new, which means you don't know the results. And you have to have the ability to test. You need to create an infrastructure in your business where you have the reserves, the capital, the operational foundation to be able to take these chances. Jim Collins uses a phrase around shoot bullets, then cannonballs. And the point he's making is make sure that within your business, you're able to try a number of things very, very quickly. And then the ones that work, you throw everything behind it. Reduce your cost of experimentation. Again, we spoke a lot about the outdated pricing or quoting process in many life insurance products. And this is because one of the greatest challenges is how do we take the current underwriting system, the current risk assessment process, and the current pricing models, and how do we create a custom experience that isn't outdated, that doesn't require 10 pages of application forms, that doesn't require 3 visits to a doctor and 16 needles in your arm. And that's a really difficult thing to do. You try and do something new in this space, and the first response is reinsurers say, well, where's our experience? Where do we find the tables from? And again, I think the answer to this is something that Tony alluded to, is collect data at every possible step. Collect your customer data, order it properly, structure it in a way that you can make meaningful insights from it, because that becomes the experience that you can rely on in 2, 3, 4 years' time. The regulatory process, again, is seen as the massive barrier to innovation. I suppose my view is subtly different in that I accept that a lot of the regulatory processes do slow us down unintentionally. But the reality is, from my experience, it's complying with these regulatory experiences that creates quite an operational burden in your business. And it's that starts to change the culture. One of the most significant changes in our business at FMI was when we moved from having a cell captive to acquiring our own life license. And I'll be honest, for the first 2 years, there was absolutely zero innovation in our business because we were spending every waking moment simply trying to figure out how to comply with the new responsibilities of running and owning a life license. As soon as we created the infrastructure to support that, we then found that compliance and regulatory processes didn't own us we were able to control them, and they were managed in a way that enabled the business to operate more efficiently. So in a almost a paradoxical way, the initial focus on compliance and regulatory processes enabled us to focus on innovation later. And finally, and this is probably the key theme of this morning's discussion for me, is that in my experience, the biggest obstacle, the biggest barrier to innovation is distribution channel adoption. Coming up with great ideas is easy, and nowadays with the technology available, even executing them is relatively easy. But turning that into a successful, profitable business is the hard part, because without sales, without distribution take-up, these ideas simply won't succeed. So if we flip it around, I forgot the final point, which is consumer trust again, which is a theme that we've chatted about a lot this morning. A lot of the enablers for these barriers, or a lot of the ways that we can overcome these barriers, is around being able to get quality data. One of the ways that prevent us being able to access that kind of data is consumer trust. I think we've spent a lot of time this morning as well talking about fraud and the cost of fraud in businesses. I think one of the greatest reasons for fraud is that there is very little trust between the consumer and the insurance industry at whole. There was a survey done in the States, I think 5 or 6 years ago, and I get the percentage slightly wrong, but the point is the same. It was somewhere between 60 to 70% of people surveyed felt that it was okay to lie to the insurance company for a claim. And it was because it was almost defensive fraud. You know, the insurance company is going to screw me anyway, so I've got to take every opportunity I can to get something out of them. And when you have typically law-abiding people who have gotten to the point where they are willing to lie and defraud the insurance customers, you realize you've got this fundamental breakdown in trust. And rebuilding that relationship is absolutely crucial. So what are the enablers of innovation? And in some ways, it's simply the 180 of the slide before, but having a very clear purpose in your business and having a leadership and a culture that gets rid of the barriers and enables that and rewards innovation, rewards experiments, and even acknowledges that failures are a success in and of themselves. Technology is, and given the theme of this conference, is the single biggest enabler to innovation. It allows us to behave in a way that we simply couldn't have thought possible 5, 10 years ago. And it's terrifying to think what we're going to be able to do in 5 years' time. Technology reduces costs through automation and improved efficiency. It enables processes that previously we couldn't even conceptualize. They simply weren't possible. And what it also does is it helps, when we talked about the regulatory burden a couple of minutes ago, it helps handle that in a way that it doesn't swamp your business and overwhelm the culture of innovation. Finally, alternative sources of customer data and simply just collecting customer data and storing it in and of itself becomes one of the most powerful enablers of innovation. And then I think cell capture structures, particularly talking in an insurance world. Building a life insurer, building a short-term insurer, and acquiring and managing a license is an incredibly expensive barrier to entry. Cell capture providers, and they're particularly strong in this country. Guardrisk is the leading cell capture provider worldwide. It's a massive opportunity we have in South Africa that enables innovation. It gives people with product ideas and insurance expertise the ability to go to market and behave as a life insurer without the costs and the regulatory risks associated with owning your own life license, and enables all kinds of, I think, product development and innovation. So if I quickly run through a few case studies, the first one is from FMI, and this one speaks to product innovation. The life insurance industry, South Africa and worldwide, is incredibly lump sum dominated. Typically, anything between 90 to 95% of all cover sold in the market are lump sum benefits as opposed to benefits that pay the policyholder an income. The only place where income benefits are reasonably prominent is within the income protection space or disability. FMI's single purpose was around protecting your ability to earn an income. And in conversations with customers, we realized that the reason they take life insurance or life cover is because they want to leave their family, their dependents, with an income stream. And it was this obvious insight that led us to say, well, let's build life cover and critical illness and structure it in a way that actually pays an income rather than simply a one-off lump sum. Our view was that completely simplified the advice process for advisors. It simplified the customer's understanding of what they were getting. For a typical customer who knows that if you pass away, your family needs 50,000 Rand a month to live on, that's an easy decision to make, and that's an easy product to understand. But to convert that into equivalent lump sum is fraught with assumptions, complexity, and a whole lot of risks that, in our view, remained with the customer unintentionally. So we were able to rethink life insurance and reposition products in a completely different way. Second, and I'll draw from our time with Aynjil in the past year or two, I think one of the most exciting things that I've learned about Aynjil is the ability that we have now to launch a life insurer using all of the cloud-based technology that's available to us. The idea of creating a best-of-breed group of partners allows you to launch a company or launch a product incredibly quickly with a very low cost. And I probably shouldn't be sharing all of this detail, but we launched a full digital life insurer with, in my biased opinion, an incredible product with less than R1 million direct investment. And it took us just over a year. That simply would have been unthinkable 2 or 3 years ago. We're able to utilize all the partners available currently in the life insurance ecosystem in South Africa. We went to market exceptionally quickly through a cell-captive partnership. We were able to develop and price our product exceptionally quickly through support from our reinsurers, RGA. Through a financial reinsurance structure, we were able to raise the capital in our business to support new business strain. And most importantly, from a tech development, we were able to build a full end-to-end customer digital customer-facing experience and the underlying policy admin system for very little investment, simply through partnering with experts at various pieces of the chain. And it's this completely different thinking of cloud-based technology and a modern architecture that has allowed us to do things that previously, in my previous life, were just simply impossible. To give some context, Aynjil runs now with 2 full-time tech people and access to a handful of developers that we switch on and off as required. FMI, when I left, we had 50 to 60 full-time developers. That's the fundamental difference between legacy technology and today's modern technology. It allows us to move extremely quickly, it allows us to keep costs to a minimum. And one of the things that it enables is businesses that are able to specialize in a very, very niche way. Because the running costs of a business have now become so significantly reduced and can be kept almost entirely variable, it allows businesses to build with a single-minded focus and a very, very niche product offering. Previously, it was almost impossible to create an economically viable single product line business simply because the costs and overheads associated with running a life insurer. That world has now completely changed. The opportunity for customers means you're going to have more and more products or companies launching that are able to focus entirely on a very narrow part of your needs. The challenge for traditional businesses is that these newer, smaller startups are able to come around and specialize in a small part of your business and spend 24 hours a day thinking about that and nothing else. And I think at the end of the day, the only people that are going to win here are the customer, because we are going to get increasingly better quality solutions delivered. The final case study, again, is a theme that we've chatted around a lot, this challenge of pricing and risk assessment. And our goal when starting Aynjil was twofold. One is we wanted to help more people beat cancer by creating what we thought is a world-class cancer insurance solution. But the second one is we wanted to reduce the friction. We wanted to remove the barriers to a customer becoming a policyholder. And our goal was to say, how could you become fully covered through using your phone and nothing else in less than 3 months? And we're able to deliver that by thinking very differently around the questions and the data that we needed to make an informed risk decision. One of the enablers for us to be able to do this differently was access to alternative sources of data. And more importantly, the fact that we have single-mindedly focused on the risk of cancer and nothing else. And that removed 80% of the questions or information that we would typically have asked for a customer in a normal life insurance underwriting process. I'm a little low on time, so I won't take you through the demo, but you're welcome to play around the website and have a look at any time you want. This is what the product looks like. what the sales process looks like. And as I touched on, it takes less than 3 minutes. We had to rip out every option or every kind of additional complication for the client from this process. Now, for me, having come from a broker world previously, where everything that drove our product development was complexity and optionality, it was a fundamentally different way of going about the product development process. Our goal here was to say that the customer needs to make one decision and one decision only. How much cover would you like? Everything else, all the additional benefits and features of the product are baked into one basis. There's no gold, silver, bronze. There's no entry-level premium offering. And it's removing some of those choices that allowed us to create a sales process and a sales experience that was so quick and so simple. So the point is, almost anything is possible. But market adoption and distribution remains a challenge. If you're trying to change behavior, or if you're trying to introduce something truly new, this still remains, for me, the biggest barrier to successful innovation. And there are a number of tools to overcome this challenge. The one is to make sure that every innovation you do take to market is based on real customer insights. And it must be authentic. More importantly, or as importantly, you really need to understand your sales channel. Every mistake I've made in my career is when we've launched products without fully understanding the hopes, fears, the sales process, and the customer base of our chosen distribution channel. And I'll give you one or two very, very simple examples. I remember we launched a product at FMI, and every time we spoke to brokers, they loved it. They accepted the need, they understood how it was better for their customers. I remember going around the country chatting to brokers one-on-one, and there was one in particular who was an ardent supporter of us, but we were getting almost no sales volume. Until I realized that his sales process internally was to get a simple set of like-for-like comparable benefits for the client, send them off to all of his insurers, broker consultants, and the first 3 that came back with a quote were the ones he presented in front of his client. Now, we had spent all of our time and effort giving him training, marketing material, explaining why our product solution was superior. But none of that mattered because we were never put on the table as an option. The single thing that turned him into one of our top supporters was making sure that whenever he requested a quote, we were the first one back. Then we were able to compete. Then we were at the table and we could then have an opportunity to talk. So it's a really simple example, but unless you understand the sales process of your distribution channel, you're unlikely to unlock the opportunities that come from your innovations. Similarly, when you introduce anything new, particularly in a broker environment, the advisors today are overwhelmed by compliance and regulatory demands, and have got typically very structured sales processes to help manage those compliance stresses. When you introduce anything new, it often creates more fear and more difficulty than a solution, because it now means they've got to rethink their typical process. We've got to figure out, well, how does this new and different product fit into the framework that I already have? And if it doesn't neatly fit, often the effort of bringing it in isn't worth the reward. Finally, it's around marketing and sales enablement, and doing everything you can for your sales channel to make it easier for them to support you and easier for them to do the right thing, in inverted commas. Our job as product providers, or our job in the industry, if we are driving innovation to make sure that that innovation is better for the customer, we have to do every single thing in our power to make that process easier, to enable the sales channel that we are backing to actually support our products. And finally, this requires persistence and patience and the ability to repeat your message over and over and over. New ideas, as much as we love them, don't necessarily take hold straight away. They sometimes take years. Sometimes you get the timing wrong. It's the right idea, but the wrong time. And this requires just sticking to it. Because every time you say the same message, it becomes boring to you, but it may be the first time that the person you're saying it to is hearing it, or the light is going on. And I can give you hundreds of examples of where we launched amazing product innovations, but often they only took hold 2 or 3 years later. And by every metric would have been a failure, and we would have taken it from the market if we weren't purpose-led and convinced that in time, this had to be the right solution and we simply had to stick with it. So I think I've hit my time limit, but I really appreciate everyone's time. It's a real privilege to be here. And I hope some of my thoughts and experiences I've shared with you have given some food for thought.
Thank you very much, Brad. It certainly has. You spoke well into very well into what the next session is going to do. This will be Gavin Peters from Genesis, and Gavin is the VP for marketing at Genesis Technologies. Gavin, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Brad. I'll just share my screen as well. So thank you very much. Really appreciate being invited to take part in this, Tony. Fantastic presentation so far. It's always exciting to hear about where the industry is going. And Brad, I thought that was excellent. So thank you. And very much aligned with a lot of the stuff that I'm saying. So I promise you I haven't just copied your homework and written that, and you're doing that if there's any repeated themes here. But good to see we're aligned, because there's some things that I talk about in the same way, but obviously from slightly different angles in some respect as well. So as Tony said, I'm VP of marketing at Genesis. You may know Genesis. We've been around for about 25 years, having started in Cape Town. We provide an end-to-end software solution to modernize insurance businesses across policy billing and claims management. And it's really a platform for innovation by plugging into other technologies and being part of the heart of an ecosystem. So I've got a bit of experience in this space about looking at how insurance businesses can evolve and innovate. And my background is not in insurance. I've got a marketing background. So I've worked with some major B2C brands like Coca-Cola and Apple and Tag Heuer in my marketing agency days before I moved into technology or SaaS businesses. So I've sort of lent on those learnings as well to look at what innovation really means and how the best companies do it well. So what I'm going to take us through today, a little sneak preview actually of a white paper that we're about to launch, and a campaign that we're going out with about what makes innovative businesses, and we've done a bit of a study talking to clients and prospects and leaders in the industry about not only what are the barriers to innovation, but how do companies overcome those, and what do the companies that really do innovate well in insurance and beyond, what do they have in common, and how do we pull that together? So I'll just do 10 minutes of going through this before we go on to the Q&A. So it's really a bit of a build on Brad's presentation, I think. So firstly, to repeat some of the things we've heard today, innovation really isn't a nice to have, and things really are moving faster than ever before. To build on some of Brad's stats in a slightly different way, if we just look at AI, it's expected to be worth $15 trillion by 2030 out of almost nowhere in the last few years. That's from PwC, and Forbes predicts that it will replace 85 million jobs in the US alone in the next couple of years, and obviously we'll create some other ones as well. In terms of the data that's created, it's claimed that the data created in the last 2 years alone is about the same amount of everything that was ever created before that. We talked before about the amount of data that Tesla is creating. You can see there's big opportunities, and the people the companies that really are innovators are going to jump on these trends and make things happen in ways that we can't foresee right now. So the point there was already suggested earlier, that if you sit still, you're actually just going to be regressing, and probably at a reasonable rate of regression compared to everyone else if you're not thinking about what the future looks like. The problem with innovation, I think, is that understanding change is really, really hard. We've heard this from many companies, and talking from experience as well. We know that when you're doing your day-to-day job, you're servicing customers, you're running through your processes, you've got a business to manage, it's very, very difficult to look up and see what's going on around, and just to see in the concept of time what changes are really taking place when you're within that right now, and seeing how they track. And it's really hard to predict. And I'm going to give an example here that gets rolled out quite a lot. this is definitely not to snigger at it, because I would certainly love the opportunity to snigger at it, because I would certainly love the opportunity to have been the CEO of Microsoft, and Steve Ballmer is a very impressive person. But even he got it wrong when he said in 2007, there's no chance the iPhone is going to get any significant market share. I mean, it's easy to sort of laugh at that looking back, but it just shows how difficult it is to really predict where things are going. And now it seems ludicrous because of the world that we live in, but we couldn't have predicted back then how things are going to change. And I think the problem one of the challenges to that is a quote from Bill Gates, but being used by many different sort of thinkers, and it's a truism that we always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years and underestimate that which will occur in the next 10. So what you have is a situation where you have all this hype around certain technologies, you expect it to suddenly rapidly disrupt everything that's going on, then don't see it, and then you end up thinking, well, that's probably not going to change very much. And then before you know it, a few years later, the world has massively changed. And you haven't really been, almost, there's a danger you've not been paying attention. So what do? Do you believe every bit of hype that comes out and jump on every bit of technology because you don't know what's going to happen? If you look back over the last 5 years of big insurance predictions, there were many themes repeated over and over and over, and some have stuck around, and some have got bigger, and others have not quite taken off in the same way. But if you look at predictions from 5 years ago, the biggest insurance trends were said to be drones, wearables, AI, and blockchain. Now, all of those have had an impact on the insurance industry, but we might say now that AI is probably the one that's having the biggest impact that we can see at the moment, and probably will for the next few years, whereas something like blockchain maybe hasn't taken off for the general insurers and general consumers in the way yet that might have been expected. So it's really hard to know exactly which ones at the time are going to make an immediate impact, if not long term. And this is a hype cycle chart that comes out, that's come from Gartner, where they look at what the timeline looks like for hype and technologies and how they take off in an industry. So what you have here, you can see that in the bottom left corner, when something starts, you have a new technology emerges, and then as that takes off, you get this real peak quite soon afterwards. Media might jump on it. Investors that are excited about a new technology will sort of really raise expectations. Maybe that's what we're going through with ChatGPT and AI at the minute. And everyone will be talking about it and excited. And then if that doesn't quite come through straight away in the next sort of year or two, you get this trough of what we call the trough of disillusionment, and people start maybe thinking, well, maybe it's not going to be quite what we thought. But those who see things through and they've backed the kind of right technologies and they've got a clear purpose, as Brad was talking about, and a clear plan, can then see that lift up, and you get what they call a slope of enlightenment, and then enlightenment, a plateau of productivity. Excuse the terminology, but the idea is obviously that it can then pick up and make a real difference to the industry. But you do get this up and down initially. The danger for insurance businesses particularly, and I'll go on to why, is that it's very easy to get very excited by the hype initially and then get very fed up at the next point where it might drop off a little bit, and then get stuck in a bit of a cycle between the peaks and the troughs and never really seeing something through, because there's so much change going on and it's so difficult to implement that you're jumping on and off all the time. And whilst you want to be continually evolving, the danger is you keep starting again rather than seeing something through, which can be a real barrier. The reason for that, I think, in the insurance industry more than some others, is that it is difficult, it is quite complex, and things can take quite a long time. So particularly for the established businesses that have been around for many years and have built up a lot of legacy technology, that can be a real barrier. We know that. Unpacking processes and technologies that have been built over many years and trying to use them to innovate in new ways can really take time. The market is complex. There can be many layers between the insurer and the end insured. there's long product life cycles. It's not the same. I talked about some of the companies I worked with before, like your Apples and your Tag Heuers. You might buy products much more often, and you get a lot of consumer touch points. And your big tech companies have a lot of engagement with customers, maybe on a day-to-day basis, where they can test products and get ongoing customer feedback. So leading on to the final point there, the lack of customer feedback is, if you're only dealing with a customer once a year when they are taking out a policy or renewing, there's not quite the opportunity to test and learn and be quite so fast with things. So it might take a longer life cycle to really get things moving. So the problem is then, in terms of what is a barrier to really innovating in this industry, is that companies, big companies particularly, tend to enter, and it's not just insurance, many enterprise companies will tend to enter multi-year digital transformation programs, because they've got a lot of technology to unpack, a lot of big plans to put in place, a lot of processes, and it takes time. But the problem with those, if you enter a multi-year program, is that it tends to offer three choices for innovation. One is that you don't go too ambitious with it, because you recognize you don't really know what's going to happen in future. So let's just stick with what we know now and build on that, and then look at it again in a few years' time. Massive risk then that you are doing what we said you can't afford to do, which is play safe and stagnate. Number two is you gamble on the unknown. You take a big punt. You think, well, this is probably what the future is going to look like in 5 years' time. It's going to take us that long to get there, so let's just go. Not really something the insurance industry is known for good reason, is taking big risks and gambling. So again, that's not usually a go and a good route to take. And number three is probably the most likely one, is that you get stuck behind the curve in a never-ending cycle of transformation. You plan, you build something, things change, you go back and you build again. You keep doing it, and you're kind of keeping up with the market, and your product is evolving, and you're doing all the right things, and the things that we talk about in terms of evolving and modernizing and doing things in a incremental manner rather than in one big go. But the problem is you're always slightly behind the curve because it takes so long to get there. So how do we innovate? And just to take a breather there on innovation, a key point for me is that innovation does not mean digitize. It's a huge part of it, and obviously what we've talked about with the plethora of data and new technology and different ways of engaging with consumers, that digital is at the heart of it. But just digitizing on its own is not necessarily innovating. So how do we innovate in terms of do things differently and look at what our product might look like in a few years' time? How do we do that if it's not a case of a 5-year program and the options we talked about above? Well, we've talked to a lot of companies that are in this space, and we've come up with this kind of concept. A way of summing it up is that we think that the approach that they take when you bring it all together is what we call pro-adaptability. So what does that mean? Well, pro-adaptability is a kind of business practice or approach where the innovative businesses practice proactive, not reactive adaptation. So they're adapting their businesses to trends, but they're kind of doing it in advance. And they're building everything in place to make sure that they're set up to react as much as they are reacting to things that are going on. And that's because they recognize two key things. One is that if you're only adapting to now, what's going on right at the moment, it's already too late. If you're looking at what's happening right now in the market and you're going to build your transformation program around that, as I said, by the time you get there, things have changed. But the other side is they also recognize we just don't really know what it's going to look like in 5 years' time. We can make our best estimates, and it's very, very important that we're always tracking those things, but we can't say for sure exactly what things are going to look like when we get there. So we think there's 3 types of businesses here in terms of how adaptive companies are. And I can talk you through a very quick example of how this might look. So on the left-hand side, the non-adaptive businesses. If we take the example of ChatGPT, hot on everyone's lips at the minute, everyone's talking about it and working out what they're going to do, because crazy to think it only really released at the back end of last year, and suddenly generative AI is sort of transforming everything. Well, the non-adaptive businesses get a new piece of tech like that and they say, well, it's probably hype. We can't do much about it right now. We've got a very full roadmap. So let's just see how that plays out and we'll come back to it next year. Adaptive businesses say, well, no, we need to adapt to this. We can recognize the change. You know, we're on this. We've got our ear to the ground. We recognize we need to innovate. So we're going to react to that and put a plan in place. We'll build it into the roadmap. And then a year or 18 months time, we'll have our product launched, because it takes time. The pro-adaptive businesses were ready. They didn't know it was going to be ChatGPT, but they had all the processes in place ready to adapt to the changing landscape. And the reason they can react quickly is they've put plans in place and they've put their energy and their focus into building the agile business, the technologies, the processes and the plans. That means they can react instantly and crucially without throwing off their existing roadmap and strategy. That flexibility is already built into what they do. So just to finish off, because I'm running out of time, but we think it comes down to 4 areas of what a pro-adaptive business is. A pro-adaptive business looks like, and the 4 areas that they get right, I think, are around leadership, culture, processes, and their tech. So in terms of leadership, it's about having the vision, and as Brad talked about, the purpose, to know really what they stand for, recognizing that they don't know exactly what's going to be appearing in the future, but always looking out for it and ready to assess where things might go. It's carving out time to innovate and making sure that there's a willingness to flex and adopt and learn across the organization. That's built into the kind of DNA of the company. Culture comes completely off the back of that the team's belief, the leadership have bought into it. You've got the right people and the right processes in place to build that culture, to make sure that the company acts in an agile, flexible way. They understand the vision and the purpose, exactly as Brad said, but they also understand that things will change as we try and get there. Processes, for me, is a huge amount about collaboration within teams and externally with third parties, with external partners in your ecosystem, to make sure that you can move quickly, that you can innovate alongside other teams and as I say, collaboration, open architecture, APIs are up to date and those things. We'll talk about tech in a second. But in terms of carving out time, we also found, and this is something that Coca-Cola talk about a huge amount, is that they have the 70-20-10 rule in everything that they do. 70% of their time, effort, processes go towards their core product and doing what they do and making sure that's as good as possible. 20% goes into things that they think are going to work and they're pretty sure, but they're kind of innovative. 10% they carve out for testing and learning. They don't expect them to work, but things might work. It's your kind of moonshots and having that innovative culture built into what they do. And then finally, the technology, having a modern tech stack and open architecture in place, your core platforms that can focus on what you do really well, but are able to adapt and plug into different technologies as they emerge, through your innovation teams that can manage those, to jump on things as they come out, to test, to learn, to release, but make sure you do that without that affecting everything else you do in your business. And this takes time. It takes time to get right. And the businesses that get this right put as much effort into proactively being ready to adapt as they do to the adaptation itself. So just to sum that up, I think the final thing to say really is that the pro-adaptive businesses that we've found have the right people, processes and tech in place to react to change without losing focus on their vision or disrupting their business. But in terms of that disruption from the market, they get themselves in a place to really welcome rather than fear disruption, which is the difference between a modern business and one that is always going to struggle. So I think that's me out of time, and I'll wrap up there. So thank you very much.
That's brilliant, Gavin. Thank you so much. Yeah, lots of food for thought in those 2 presentations. If I, I'm trying to wrap my head around, what the points is that are great for us to discuss. And I think from Brad's side, he spoke about trust, and he spoke about starting with the customer in mind. And then when I look at your side, Gavin, you a lot of what you spoke about ties up with that. But I think one of the things that came through strongly was the fact that you mentioned proactiveness and then pro-adaptiveness, which, all of these sort of things almost go together, because in my time that I spent in the corporate environment, I always had one foot in product development, and then the other foot sort of over my journey went from legal and risk management and compliance, and then to distribution and training and sales, and then finally ended up with both feet heading up a product development division for a life business. I always had those two areas that were challenging. The one was taking the company with in terms of innovation, and the other one was taking the market with in terms of innovation. So you follow the trends in the market and you try and be proactive and figure out what is going to come and prepare the market for that, while you, on the other side, sit inside the company and you try and prepare the people in the company to go with you on this new development journey, and you have this tension between those two, although they're separate. And I think Brad maybe had more the company hat and you more the market hat. So although you have the separate tensions where you're going, but you also have that tension between those two that you have to almost marry. So maybe, Brad, to start on your side, how do you, now there's a difference, and luckily you have those two hats between a new business and an existing business that has to adapt. How do you take your internal people with you in an existing business where they, to try and get them to be proactive and to be adaptive or pro-adaptive, as Gavin so eloquently put it? How do you do that?
I mean, I suppose that's the $1 million question, and the challenge lies in an existing business. A new business is relatively easier. You're all on the same team from the beginning. You have one focus. I mean, I'll give some examples of things that we've tried, or I've tried in my career. Some work, I think, better than others. But it comes to really those themes I was chatting about how to build it into the DNA of your business. It is cliched, but it is communicating over and over and over. We used to hold regular sessions with our team. Every month I would spend an hour chatting to the entire business around progress. I mean, the employees in the business were more informed about the business's progress and financials than the board. There was kind of full transparency, and that enabled everyone to feel part of the business, but it also enabled everyone to contribute to where we were going. We were quite deliberate about we used to structure things called inside-out sessions. We'd do them every 3 or 4 months in the business, and we would map out the biggest challenges we were facing. I can't remember who it was that chatted earlier, but the challenge around innovation is, where do you focus your efforts? What are the biggest levers for change? It starts with regular communication and transparency, and then we were quite deliberate about creating what we called inside-out sessions in the business. So whatever the challenges that we were facing, and it goes to the earlier point that was raised this morning around how do you prioritize the resources in the business, and how do you pick the 2 or 3 things that are going to kind of move the dial the most. And we would share those challenges, share the biggest problems that we were trying to overcome, and give everyone an opportunity to come around and contribute. And almost without fail, something significant came out of those sessions that we were able to execute on. And the fact that every single person in the business felt like they were made informed, that they were part of the process, and that there was a direct link
is one of the challenges of technology. Yeah.
The irony is not lost in this being a tech conference.
Yeah. Okay, Gavin, let's go a little bit. I mean, I prompted you there in terms of the market preparation and making sure your customers are with you by the time you launch. Maybe you can, how much time do you spend on that?
I think to build on what Brad said a little bit, it's as much about the internal processes as the making sure your customers are with you. That's all part of building your brand and building your engagement with your customers. What we're talking about here really is instilling that, very much as Brad said, the DNA. Brad, I'll finish and then we'll try again. Finish your point. Someone doesn't want you to say that last bit.
I'm sure you finished it more eloquently than I would have.
No, I was going to build on it and say, for me, when I talk about being proactive, it's probably taking a sort of step back and getting everyone to buy into the fact that, okay, this is what we do. We adapt and we flex, and we're going to put those processes in place and make everyone aware of it and everyone buy into it. And I love what Brad was saying about the point of little tweaks about getting the board to buy into the board packs that are going to be about innovation and not just leads. In terms of marketing, I'd love that, by the way, Brad. So I'd like some tips on how we do that. But getting that everyone to realize that this innovation is part of the culture. This flexibility and adaptability is something we're going to take a step back and build those processes in place, as much as we're going to focus on one specific bit of tech or one particular goal around achieving a revenue target or something, because that's what's going to open up all the rest of the stuff in future. So I think it's taking it as a project around building in flexibility rather than just assume it's going to happen and go, right, this is what we're now going to be. We're going to be a flexible, adaptable business. We're going to put this plan in place. We're going to carve out time for the leaders. We're going to put these processes in place for the team. We're going to carve this little innovation unit out. This tech, it's all going to feel like part of something that is perhaps a bit of a switch to how I've done things in the past, which was react to things as they come along, but still carry on doing things in the same way and hope it iterates. So I think it's taking a pause and going, this is the way we now do things, get everyone to buy that, and then it will speed things up in future.
Brad, any further comment there?
I completely agree. I suppose the only point to add is that employees typically are quite cynical when businesses make beautiful speeches about innovation. And we need to make sure that it's authentic. And part of making it authentic is making sure that these are the things that you reward and recognize in your business. I've seen too many businesses that talk about innovation, but the only people they reward and recognize are the people who consistently come first in sales. So it's around surfacing all of these and making people feel like they are part of the solution. So when great ideas come from somewhere in the business, make sure that you give credit and you recognize where it comes from, because for people to feel empowered that their ideas will in a month's time become part of business practice is an incredibly empowering feeling. And I think that brings people along for the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that I found is that, I always try and think, when you an employee in a company, it's not just the customer, the end customer that you keep in mind when you have what you were called a customer-centric approach. It's anybody that is going to use your services. In other words, if you're in new business, it's also the person that sits in claims that is going to use your services. The whole structure within a business actually have to have this proactive, innovative mindset to look at how each and every aspect of what they do on a daily basis interacts with what somebody else in the company does. Because innovation is not just about new products or a new process. Innovation is also about sort of understanding exactly what happens within a company and trying to optimize all of those things, some of it being small things and some of it being bigger things. But the whole idea, as Gavin alluded, was the pro-adaptive approach. I really enjoy that word because it's not just proactive, it's pro-adaptive. And maybe just a last thing from both of your sides, in terms of the hat that you wear, how much of that comes from the top? And how much of that comes from people who sit in specific positions, as in either the marketing division or the product development division, etc., to create that culture?
I mean, I think it all comes from the top. The responsibility of the leader, in my mind, is to create the environment that fosters innovation and remove as many barriers as possible. And maybe just to build on Gavin's point a few minutes ago, is if I just think about the kind of lessons from both FMI and Aynjil, a startup as opposed to a more established business, I don't think FMI would have been able to incubate Aynjil in its business unless we set a dedicated team somewhere on the side. Mm-hmm. But the advantages that we had of a bigger business is that we probably would have come up with a far more sophisticated solution because we had a deeper set of minds to draw on. And I think the magic is trying to find the best of both worlds. And the power that you have in a business, you've got deep sets of skills, deep sets of experiences, multiple points of view. And if you can harness that collectively, shape it behind the leader setting the 2 or 3 problems to get everyone's energy behind, you can find some really powerful solutions that will come out of that. But then in the execution of it, allow people the space and the focus to do that without the distraction from the whirlwind. And so my sense is that that's how you can actually get the benefit of the large business, but still create the entrepreneurial environment within it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Just to add to that, sorry, Taylor, I'd say that for me the ideas, the culture and the vision come from the top, but the ideas should come from everywhere because you've got the culture and the vision in place. As an example, we do it at Genesis, and many companies do. We have an annual hackathon that is put together by the leadership team. It was our CEO Andre's idea to make sure we're doing this. Then it's managed by the middle layer of management to make this happen, and then anyone in the business enters the hackathon competition and comes up with great ideas. So that's quite an example of the ideas. If you put the right culture in place, should really start flowing, but it has to be led from the top.
Mm-hmm. Now, Gavin, being marketing, not marketing in a life insurance business, but marketing in a technology business that markets a product for the insurance business. And you keep in mind in your innovation what the end customer wants, not necessarily just the company that's going to use your tech, which means that you almost sometimes have to sell where your client, as in the insurer, has to go in terms of their client. And you need to prepare them for that. How do you turn that mindset there to not just look at you as marketing a technology platform?
I mean, that is the age-old kind of B2B to C kind of mentality of when you're selling into businesses that are serving the end consumer. It's just how you do marketing in general. I mean, you're putting yourself in the shoes of your customer. So our customer is the insurance businesses or the UMAs, the carriers, the UMAs, brokers. We have to think about what they want to achieve, and what they want to achieve is they want to then deal with their customers. So we have to kind of always think through their lens and add and become sort of part of their team. We're real partners with our clients. So it's part of our kind of DNA really to think about their customers. It's the only way that we can innovate is if we're very much looking at their customers and the end consumer, because that's how we solve their problems. We equally, as you say, have to look at how they what they need, and sometimes that isn't all about the end insured. That's about improving their processes. We have to look at automation within the business that speeds up previously inefficient processes. Sometimes we're getting companies that are startups off spreadsheets and onto software for the first time. So we're looking at both sides. So it is a real balance, but I'd say because we get so close to our customers, we're always thinking about their customers, and that's just it's just making sure that we're always looking at both sides, and it can be complex because you've got a lot to take into account, but it's absolutely crucial.
And Brad, to bring this one to you, taking FMI, for instance, your experience there into account, you had two customers as well. You had the broker and you had the end customer. How much time did you give the broker in your innovation process versus the end customer?
Probably a lot, but again, almost never enough. They were the most important driver of any innovation. So where we were successful is where we brought advisors into our thinking process and brought them in early, and where we spent more time thinking about how we help them adopt it, rather than simply how we build the product. And again, where we successful, I think, was always where we created sales tools in response to their needs, and often alongside them, that allowed the new products to easily be filtered into their way of life and the way they ran their sales practice. So for us, we saw them as crucial. I mean, we had the age-old debate, I guess, that every broker-driven insurer has: who's your client? In the end, we viewed the advisors as our sales team, and their clients as our clients as well. And we almost treated them as if they were part of our business and an extension of our business rather than they were our customer.
Because I know in my journey through the corporate world, I always had the advisors feeling that they are a bit left out in that innovation process, and sort of feeling that they best understand the actual client, but that their word doesn't come through so strong. So maybe that is a sort of a pain point for insurers for competitive advantage.
Yeah. Look, I mean, it's easy for me to say it. You have to ask our advisors whether we got it right, but I think we did a decent job at bringing our advisors into the innovation process, and particularly getting very close feedback and quick feedback from them around what's working and what isn't. I mean, linked to your question there, my time with Icon, which was for the first time where I sat in a product agnostic world, was supporting advisors and sitting between multiple product providers that previously had been my competition. The thing that struck me is advisors in this industry don't realize just how powerful they are. I often used to say to them, you don't realize that probably 70 to 80% of our product development time inside our businesses is figuring out what you want and what you like. You are the most important stakeholder we have. And I think advisors often, because they are individuals and not part of a broader collective, don't realize the voice and the power that they have in the industry to shape it, for better or worse.
Yeah, that's maybe something that we need to create more awareness about in the industry. Definitely. Yeah. Gavin, any last words from you on this subject?
I guess I'd just say, from the stuff that we've learned as we're going through, is that everyone kind of fears what they don't know. And that's what we found as we go through, because God, everything is moving really quick, isn't it? Everything's going so fast, and there's a new piece of tech coming out every day, and you feel like, well, if we're not on top of every single thing that's going on, then what do we do? How do we react? And so that's what I think this is all about, really. What some of the barriers to innovation are: feeling like you've got to be on top of everything, and then getting stuck, just getting stuck in trying to do too much. Whereas if you spend your time working out how you can react and adapt and calm all that down, and exactly as Brad says, stay focused on your vision and your purpose, and not get distracted by being led by the tech for tech's sake, then that's the best way of using innovation, having the ability to react, but still always focused on your overall purpose.
Yeah, I think that was sort of why I got that theme for the conference, for the TechFest, is to look at the fundamentals of the business again, because it's important that we had that InsurTech hype, because it helped people's mindsets move into a direction where you think anything's possible, and try and break out of the mold, reinvent the wheel, so to speak, which happened quite a bit. And I think that was important. But yeah, in the end, it is sort of, you have to also sort of cement your feet a bit and stay in a place where your business is, and not just venture too far outside of that. But that said, I mean, it is just, we're in such an exciting time with regards to everything that is available to us to be able to innovate. You know, it's like the simplest things that make you realize how fast things are moving. Now, specifically, I think of it, this cartoon. You know, it's that Stone Age cartoon of the guy standing on the wheel and riding around. Now, many younger people might not remember that cartoon, but I can't remember what it was called. But it was, and it is just at that point in time, it almost looks so archaic and so primitive. The idea that this guy standing on the wheel trying to go somewhere. And today, if you open YouTube, you can watch these guys going around on a single wheel in the streets. And that's now, you know, it's become a reality. Things that you never thought could actually be possible. And I think in our business, there are so many of those sort of things. We have these mental blocks thinking that it can't be done, or that's not how it is. And actually, if we just start listening and looking and reading wider, found all the opportunities. Brad, thank you so much for this. It was great chatting to you guys. Gavin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm sure your presentations are going to be available to everyone at some stage on our platform. We'll let everybody know. But thank you very much for that.